Hello, students. This is assistance on the text for AG 12. And this text is one that was mentioned in the email that I sent home to your parents about it being the last assignment that we have. So, the first thing I want to assure you is that all of these documents are modified. So, they were written, the first two are contemporary documents, but they have been modified so that we could understand them. And clearly, they've also been translated. There are large introductions in front of each one. And at the very bottom, there is vocabulary. So first I'm going to read the introduction, then I'm going to read the vocabulary, and then I will read the text. And you can see this is literally 2 paragraphs. So this is not an onerous amount of reading. So document A is from Pericles, and I will use the pointer, and here's what this says. The following excerpt, and an excerpt, remember, is just a very small part of a larger text, is from a speech known as the funeral oration. Oration is simply a fancier way of saying speech. So this was a speech made at a funeral, delivered by the Athenian general and politician Pericles in 431 BCE. This is a date that we know from our fib notes. Pericles was widely seen as the leader of Athens. He gave this speech during a funeral for Athenian soldiers who died in the first year of the brutal Peloponnesian War against Sparta. So, this speech by Pericles is given for all the soldiers who died. And I want to point out that another very famous speech given by a political leader for all the soldiers who died is the Gettysburg Address, delivered by Abraham Lincoln. Sparta was Athens' chief rival. The Athenian historian Thucydides included the speech in his book, The History of the Peloponnesian War. Historians are not sure when Thucydides wrote down the speech or how close his version was to the original. So, what we understand from that is who knows really how much of this was actually what Pericles meant, but probably the intent is good. And I do want to tell you that Thucydides is considered the father of history. He's the Greek person who is credited with being very careful about recording events and writing down facts and making sure that things were all as close to reality as he could make it. I will begin, and I'm going to use the pointer. I'm also going to add in some information and we will mark up the text. So as stated, I'm going to come down here with the vocabulary and read these first so that when I come to these words, I know what they mean. So social class is simply someone's position in society. And you might remember that one of the leaders that we wrote about in AG, pardon me, excuse me, in AG 10 was someone who separated the people of Athens by social class. And then another guy separated them by where they lived, or organized people by where they lived. Merit refers to talent, skills, or qualifications. Most people would like to be judged on their merit, not for who their siblings were, or how much money they have, or how good looking they are. Obscurity means unknown or unimportant. So if you live in obscurity, that means nobody really knows about you. And then magistrates is a fancy way of talking about government officials. We will see this word soon when we learn about Rome. So it tells you at the bottom here the source is Thucydides, who was around. So remember that C means circa, around 460 to 490, 460 to 395 BCE. This is Pericles' funeral oration in the history of the Peloponnesian War. So there's quite a bit of difference in what we've got going on with when this was written and when it was supposed to actually occur, which is 431 BCE. So, paragraph 1. Remember, this is Pericles speaking of Athens. Our constitution favors the many instead of the few. This is why it is called a democracy. If we look to the laws, they give equal justice to all. Advancement in public life falls to one's reputation for good work. Social class is not allowed to interfere with someone's merit, and poverty does not block the way. If a man is able to serve the state, he is not stopped by the obscurity of his condition. So in paragraph 1, Pericles is saying that Athens is really pretty incredible. Paragraph 2. The freedom which we enjoy in our government extends also to our ordinary life. There, far from being jealous of each other, we do not feel called upon to be angry with our neighbor for doing what he likes. But all this ease in our private lives does not make us lawless as citizens. Fear is our chief protection against this, teaching us to obey the magistrates and the laws. And that is the conclusion of the first document. So that was pretty easy. Let's go on to document B. This one, again, is modified. It is the Athenian Constitution. Again, the word here is excerpt, and it says the following excerpt comes from the Athenian Constitution, written by the Greek philosopher Aristotle between 330 and 322 BCE. So we always want to make sure we're circling dates, underlining dates, and we know about this guy because we worked with him under a G7. That was the one where you looked at the different documents and answered questions about government. You might not have read the one on Aristotle, but it was there. Aristotle was the leading Greek philosopher of the time and is credited with writing accounts of the constitutions of 170 different Greek states. That is quite an accomplishment. This one is 1 paragraph, 2 paragraphs, 3 paragraphs. Very short. I'm going to go down here and read the vocabulary first so that I know what I'm looking for. First word to come across is franchise. There are several meanings of this word. In this case, franchise means the right to vote and participate in government. I have the franchise. I have the right to vote. You students do not yet have the right of franchise because you are not old enough to vote. Freeborn means not born to a parent who is a slave, who is an enslaved person. You know that Athenians and Spartans all practiced slavery. Magistrates, again, we see this word is government officials. And lot refers to lottery. So if someone says, I was selected by lot, that just means that they were randomly selected, much like our fickle finger of fate bucket. So here we go. We're going to read about the Athenian Constitution as written by Aristotle. At the time that we are speaking, the people have secured their control of the state and established the constitution which exists at the present day. The democracy has made itself master of everything and administers everything by its vote in the assembly and by the law courts. Paragraph 2. The present state of the Constitution is as follows. The franchise is open to all men who are of citizen birth by both parents. So I am going to write that down. So if you are a man who is a citizen and both of your parents were citizens, then you can vote. They are enrolled as citizens at the age of 18, which incidentally is the age at which you also gain the franchise, the right to vote. On the occasion of their enrollment, the current citizens give their votes first on whether the new candidates appear to be of the age set by the law. If the candidates are not of the right age, they are dismissed back into the ranks of the boys. So this is quite interesting because it lets us know that people's birth dates were a little bit wonky, right? Not knowing when they were going to be 18, that kind of thing. So they're voted on by the other people to decide whether or not they look like they're old enough to vote. I also want to point out some signal words right here. So, bum, bum, bum. He's saying is as follows. He uses here secondly. Okay, so this is like a signal word that he's telling you. And we looked at signal words in our Persian War homework. Secondly, the current citizens give their votes on whether the candidate is freeborn and has two citizen parents as the laws require. If they decide that he is not a free man, he can appeal to the law courts. If the court decides that he has no right to be enrolled as a citizen, he is sold by Athens as a slave. So this is sort of a big deal. So if you are suspected of not being a free person, it actually will be sent to a court of law. And if the jury says, hey, you're not really going to be a citizen, you get sold into slavery, which is sort of a serious effect. If he wins his case, he has the right to be enrolled as a citizen without further question. So, on the other hand, if it goes to court and it's clear that you're a citizen, nobody's going to mess with you again. Paragraph 3. All the magistrates that are responsible for the ordinary routine of administration are elected by lot in the assembly. So, again, they're randomly selected. That's what we mean by lot. However, the military treasurer, the commissioners of the festival fund, and the superintendent of the water supply are elected by vote. So that one, people are actually running for those offices and they're voted in. All military officers are also elected by vote. And the source is Aristotle, the Athenian Constitution, 330 to 322 BCE. So he's really telling us again, we've learned about the Constitution twice now. It's been mentioned. So the idea that Athens has a written constitution and Aristotle is writing about it. Our third document is document C, the Athenian population. It is not a text, it is a chart of numbers. And it says here the data below comes from the book Wealthy Hellas. And Hellas is what the Greeks would have referred to as where they lived, which is Greece. They didn't call it Greece, they called it Hellas. They themselves referred to themselves as Hellenes, kind of like the name Helene. This was written by Professor Josiah Ober in 2010. Ober is a professor of classical civilization and political science at Stanford University. And if you know anything about Stanford University, it's a pretty fancy place. For this one, we want to just point out that metics, which you should know what metics are, they were foreigners or Greeks from other city-states that settled in Athens, normally for purposes of trade. They became a key part of the city-state's economy, industry, and education system. So what it's telling you, what you should remember, is that metics were not full citizens, they were foreigners, and they typically did not take part in the government. I'm going to read through this text with you, which is in the form of a chart. Your columns here are population group, total number of people, percentage of the population, ability to vote. And then within the population group, it's going to break it down. We can see that our total population in Athens is about 240,325 people. For reference, I would like to tell you that the current population of Columbia, Missouri is coming in at about 130,910 people. So our city, when the students aren't here, so they're not really counted in the population, would be smaller than the population of the city-state of Athens. And we know that city-states were pretty small. Columbia is not a very big city. So here we go. There are 29,900 citizen men, and that represents 12% of the population. Yes, they can vote. There are about 29,900 women. Is the number that close? Probably not, but again, so a lot of this is speculation. 12% of the population, can they vote? No, they cannot. Children of citizens represent 74,750 people. That is 31% of the population, so they are far outstripping the 24, if you add those together, the 24% of men and women. Can they vote? No, they cannot. Metics, which are these foreigners here, are 25,775. They represent 11% of the population, cannot vote. And then finally, look at this number of slaves. 80,000 estimated slaves. They make up the vast majority of the population. That's the biggest number. Can they vote? No, they cannot. So, Mr. Ober, Professor Ober, has done his math. So, the percentage of the total population, this number, able to vote is 12%. Take that as you will. Let's move on to our very last document. This one is a modern document. This is document D by Professor Hansen, and we're going to read who this is. And this is one paragraph, so very short. So Mogens Herman Hansen was a professor of philology and classics, and I had to look it up, but I'm here to tell you that philology is the study of basically the structure of language. So it's really different from linguistics, but close enough, within shouting distance. He is at the University of Copenhagen. He was, and that's in Denmark, before retiring in 2010. He is considered a leading expert in the world on the subject of Athenian democracy. The following is an excerpt from an article he wrote in 1989. So it's been a while. We presume he's still alive, but hard telling. We're going to go down here to the vocabulary. And our first vocabulary word is the Greek word for democracy. I looked it up. I believe it is pronounced demokratia. Demokratia. That's how I'm going to pronounce it. Of course, we know what oligarchy is, a form of government in which a small group of people have power and control. So, we have been talking about the fact that Sparta is really an oligarchy and Athens is really a democracy. So, let's see what Professor Hansen has to say about it. The objections regularly raised against Athenian democracy are twofold. So he's saying when people are not happy about Athenian democracy, they bring up two things. And I want to point out that this is kind of a signal word, and here is another. So here's your first one. He's like, there are two things. Here's the first one. Are you ready? Democracy is the rule of the whole of the people, excluding minors. You are a minor because you are under 18, and maniacs only. And a maniac would be someone not in charge of their own mind. Demokratia was rule by male citizens only, excluding, so not allowing, women, free foreigners who are metics, and slaves. So he's making this distinction. Thus, by our standards, it was oligarchy, not democracy. So he's saying, really, Athenians are telling you it's democracy, but it really isn't because there's so few people that are allowed to participate. So he's saying, hey, what it really is oligarchy. So that's pretty interesting. Second, here is our second signal word. So here's our first, here's our second. So he's telling you, here's the second objection. Rule was exercised directly by the people, whereas democracy today means government by representatives of the people. This is hugely important. I'm going to highlight it. It is direct democracy, okay, exercised by the people, meaning they directly were involved. They were either voted in or chosen by lot, but everybody did it every day. Whereas we are a representative democracy, which means we elect people to legislate for us. And I want to elect a person to legislate for us because I already have a job and I'm busy doing it every day. Popular assemblies belong to the past, and direct democracy has been made impossible by the size of modern nations. That deserves an underline. Direct democracy has been made impossible by the size of modern nations. People maybe would love to take part in government, but when you have a city the size of New York City, even St. Louis is a big city, Kansas City, Springfield, it just wouldn't work because there are too many people. Remember, city states were really quite small. Athenian Demokratia is criticized for being both more democratic and less democratic than democracy. It is more democratic by being government by the people instead of government by those elected by the people. It is less democratic by narrowing down the concept of demos, meaning people, to mean the adult male citizens in assembly. That is from Was Athens a Democracy? So you get to decide. I hope this helps you on your education journey.